Life comes with a lot of decisions, and it can be hard to know the right path sometimes. A therapist can help you map out what you really want, so you trust yourself to make great choices and feel excited about the future. BetterHelp offers convenient professional online therapy on your schedule, however you want it, by phone, chat, or video call. Let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/positive today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/positive.
This is Sports Daily on Wichita's #1 sports radio, 97.5 and 1240 KFH.
All right, welcome back in, everybody, to Sports Daily. It's Jacob Albrecht and Tommy Castor here with you on this Wednesday edition. We will have some WinSurge voucher giveaways coming up later in this hour. We'll talk about the TVT a little bit as the Aftershocks do not advance to the Final Four. Still a great showing, and a great showing by Shocker fans and basketball fans last night at Koch Arena. Attendance records for that tournament. They continue to set their own record and break their own record, and it was another great year of the TVT here in Wichita. Some other big news today as we congratulate Mark for his win of our HTO giveaway there in hour number 2. Stay cool, Mark, and everybody out there. Hopefully some HTO will help you do that. But Justin Herbert's contract is interesting to me, not just because it's another big quarterback getting paid, because I think it probably has something to do with what will happen with Patrick Mahomes. Mahomes' contract situation is going to be an interesting one. There doesn't seem to be any urgency. There was maybe some perceived and fake. It wasn't urgency that it was implied in that report in the offseason. There was just more of like a guess that it would get done before the start of the season. I think there's almost no chance that happens now because I think, one, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for Mahomes to go before Burrow. And two, they got to figure out what they're going to do with Chris Jones. It was Florio that reported yesterday from Pro Football Talk that this could last a while, which he admitted means, of course, it could happen like tomorrow, because that's, when you get that stuff, it's agents or front office executives trying to, leverage a little bit, and they do that through national reporters all the time. But I don't know what the answer is. I would put the chances of them not bringing back Chris Jones and him being there for the start of the regular season as very low. But I think it's on the table. I think everything's on the table. They have a difficult decision to make with Chris Jones if he wants $30 million a year at 29 years old. And I do think that's why we're not going to see anything from Mahomes until that's settled. Like, if I'm Brett Veach, unless, here's the only caveat to that, Tommy, and this is what gets interesting. What if Mahomes' deal could somehow free up the money to offset the Chris Jones deal? That's where it gets like, chicken and egg a little bit, but man, that seems unlikely that could happen.
So Chris Jones has held out since training camp started. We're in day number 4. So we're talking $200,000 in mandatory fines so far for Chris Jones. And those are not fines that can be waived. I mean, the only way that Chris Jones is going to get out of paying it is if the Chiefs say, in your new contract extension, we'll cover the cost of that. But they can't just let it go away. That's a mandatory fine that, for him holding out over the last 4 days. And, barring some kind of extension, that number will continue to grow. So that's another part of this also that I find really interesting. How big will Chris Jones allow this number to get? And I know that there are players out there that I think they call it holding in, they'll report to training camp, but they won't do anything. I've even heard of players that will report to training camp to avoid the fine, maybe even fake an injury, and then set out so they're not getting fined. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to kind of get around this, but right now, Chris Jones has not shown up to training camp. That's $200,000 in mandatory fines out of his pocket. And again, I think that number will continue to grow because I don't see an extension happening, anytime soon unless these conversations are accelerating behind the scenes and both sides are feeling a sense of urgency to get it done. Going back to your question about what happens with Mahomes versus Chris Jones, I think it comes down to how urgent does it feel from Patrick Mahomes himself, because that's really going to dictate this entire thing. If Patrick Mahomes says, okay, now I'm ready, like, let's go ahead and get it done, then they need to get it done. If Patrick Mahomes says, okay, we need to free up money to make a Chris Jones deal happen, and I'm going to make it very clear to the front office that this is a priority for me, then at that point they'll get it done. But if those things are not happening, then I think it's very unlikely we're going to see a deal for Mahomes ultimately open up money for Chris Jones.
Number one, I don't think Mahomes does that or would do that.
He's done that before, though. Keep in mind. I mean, he has he's converted some salary
I mean, put an ultimatum on the front office. Yeah,
right.
He would totally.
But he has converted, parts of his deal in the past
absolutely
to free up money for other people. Like, that's happened. So it would take that for a Mahomes deal to get done before Jones.
I think they can probably do it with Jones's contract in and of itself, but they do sort of need to work in tandem, because it's going to, again, when we talked about Jones's, desire being much higher than everybody thought, that alters a lot of plans for the front office for other guys. So, you have to, if you're going to get there with Jones, you now have to alter what you do 2 and 3 years from now. So the Mahomes piece of it can help you do that. Like, if you can work them together, then maybe you can still get the things done that you want to get done 2 and 3 years from now that really hurt you 4 years from now or 5 years from now instead of 2 or 3. I mean, that, it's sort of, you're going to have to, take your medicine at some point on this.
Oh, for sure.
There's going to be a detriment to other places on the roster. The evaluation piece for the Chiefs has to come in. Chris Jones is 29, and we want to make sure this offensive line is taken care of. I would honestly guess that making sure that can still happen would take priority when you have Mahomes there, of making sure those guys don't walk. They just invested in Juwan Taylor. You'll have a chance to, to lock up Humphrey and Trey Smith. And my guess would be that would, even over Chris Jones, just because it's Mahomes, take some priority as Mahomes gets older. Now, I could be wrong about that, but I would guess that that's the case. They're not going to be as expensive as Chris Jones. But I think if you had to, like, if you had two options, you only had A or B and you're Brett Veach, and like you're only presented these two options, and it's sign Chris Jones, but it costs you Humphrey and Trey Smith down the road, or lose Chris Jones now, but it ensures you keep Trey Smith and Creed Humphrey down the road, I think you'd take option B. And it's not that simple. I'm just saying, like, so whatever happens, I think they're going to try to make sure B happens, even if they make A happen at the same time. And Mahomes' deal could help that, I think, based on everything we've heard from Mahomes publicly, in that, A, there's no urgency on his deal. But now it lies in, I do think he's going to want to wait on Burrow, because he does have this pressure from other guys at the position where he does need to reset it to some degree. So there's some pressure on Mahomes to let the Burrow deal happen too.
And I've heard people that have said, in regards to Chris Jones, have him, don't sign him to a long-term extension. Have him play this year, or if he holds out, I think that's unlikely, but eventually he would probably play, would be the thought. Let him play out the final year of his contract, then place the franchise tag on him, and essentially you've got 2 more years of Chris Jones. The issue with that, the franchise tag for Chris Jones would be like $34 million. So the leverage is completely on Chris Jones' side, because the Chiefs would end up paying more.
I'd rather
on
have
the
him
franchise
for 34. I would. Here's what
Seriously?
I would rather have. Oh yeah, I'd rather have him for a year or 2 years at 34 than 4 years at 30. No
and have him be
question about it.
disgruntled and unhappy the entire time.
Well, he's not going to do it. No, I'm not saying that that's going to. Yes, because he would be upset. He'd be very mad. But and the other reality is he has made some money in his career. He could absolutely hold out. Like he could be like, nope.
I think that's unlikely, just because of the window that he has to still be a viable defensive player in the NFL. I mean, it'd be different if he was, 5 or 6 years younger. You could maybe afford to really threaten to hold out and not play the final year of your contract. I think you could do that and be taken seriously. I'm not sure that that would happen with Chris Jones, because the thought would be, how many more good years does he have left, right? And so I think you hold out, you're losing one of your prime earning
that's
years.
The problem, but that's the problem for the Chiefs. And again, I've said from the beginning, like, the per year doesn't concern me as much as the number of years. Like, if it's a 3-year deal, I'm probably comfortable with that risk level. But 4 years, I just don't know. And I'm telling you, Chris Jones is one of my favorite players in this league, and I think he's in the conversation as a top 5 most disruptive, influential defensive player in this league. Like, I could not think more highly of Chris Jones. But I don't think the Chiefs have a very unique situation. There aren't a lot of teams that get this, right? They've had players take discounts. Not everybody gets that. But their window is so much longer and is for so much longer than like anybody else, because they have this quarterback. I mean, think about the window. Like, truly think about how big the window was for, let's say, Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay, right? Or Tom Brady in New England. Or, Ben Roethlisberger may not be as good of an example, but, for a lot of years he was a great example. And Drew Brees. Like, when you have that quarterback that's always going to give you a chance, your window's always open. Right? Like, your window's always there. So if the window's always open and there's no need for desperation, that's what the Chiefs bring to the table, right? They don't have any desperation whatsoever to make it. That's what makes it easier for them to make hard decisions, because there is no desperation. As long as they have 15 and they can protect him, they're going to have a chance to win a Super Bowl. Like, no matter who's on the roster. I mean, we've seen that before. Aaron Rodgers before last year, right, you felt like always had a chance. Peyton Manning, except for the year, where he wasn't very good and they ended up winning a Super Bowl anyway, like, you always felt like you had a chance with Peyton Manning. You've always felt like you had a chance with Tom Brady. Like, there are only certain guys that do. The Chiefs have one of those. So they don't have to be desperate anywhere. And that's where I think, Chris Jones has to be. Chris Jones doesn't have to do anything. Chris Jones can do whatever he wants. But the Chiefs don't have to do anything, right? Like, they can just sit there and evaluate. I'm sure they have to reevaluate. It's not that dissimilar to the difficult decision that I'm sure they didn't want to make with Tyreek Hill, but they had to. Like, it didn't make sense for what else they wanted to do. Now, I would contest that Chris Jones was a part of the reason they didn't re-sign Tyreek Hill, right? Like the fact that they didn't give Tyreek Hill the deal was probably so they could make sure they kept Chris Jones. But we keep saying that with Chris Jones. How many years have we said that with Chris Jones? Like, it'll get taken care of. They're trying to make sure. And here we sit now with a holdout in hand, with no end in immediate sight, with a lot of guys on this roster that have got to get paid. They're already going to have to make tough decisions. And if they do this with Jones, that just adds to it. And I don't know, I can't quantify, because I'm not a cap guy, like what potential casualties come because of it. But if it's either of those offensive linemen, I don't think the Chiefs are going to want to do that. Now, if it maybe is Willie Gay or McDuffie down the road or Snead, I think he's probably gone anyway, then you've got some things to think about. And they have drafted defensive linemen in the first rounds of the last 2 drafts.
I agree with you to an extent that there is no desperation as far as the Chiefs are concerned right now, except for the fact that clearly they were caught off guard that this is happening. Clearly they thought that they were closer with Chris Jones. I even think privately, because
they better not have been caught off guard. If they only on Monday,
if they
only on Monday learned that Chris Jones wanted $30 million.
I'm not saying right.
Yeah, Chris Jones.
I'm not saying as recently as this week, but I mean, maybe going back a couple of months. I think they were, because if they knew that there was going to be an issue like this, don't you think that they would have built in some contingency plans at defensive tackle? Like, I know they drafted Keandre Coburn in the 5th round, but it's a 5th round pick. And maybe he will develop into a really good player. I don't know. But if they felt like it wasn't going to work with Chris Jones, or maybe maybe ultimately it would work out, but there was going to be some tension, and really, who knows, you might have wanted to spend a little bit of higher draft capital to go and get somebody to potentially, if needed, replace him. And then if that never happened, then you've got somebody who can develop behind him. But I mean, really the Chiefs, we've talked about this before. They don't have really any impactful players at that position behind Chris Jones. So that would lead me to believe that all along the organization thought, oh, we're going to get something done with Chris Jones. It's going to be really easy. And we're going to have him locked in for a number of more years down the road. We don't even need to think about having, somebody in the pipeline to replace him potentially. So that's what would lead me to believe that they might have been caught a little bit off guard, that this was going to be the situation that they were in. I'm not honestly that concerned about what happens at that position long term, because I think that they can draft a replacement and do all of that in the future. I just don't know what this year is going to look like because they have no depth.
Trying to look at when Aaron Donald signed his deal. I think he was a little younger than Jones is now when he signed that mega deal. The only thing I can think of is maybe Chris Jones's camp thought Quinnen Williams would get more. That could make some sense, right? Like that they thought that number would be bigger and closer, and it's not. And so that's where we've got this like, well, crap. Well, you know what? We're going to ask for what we're going to ask for anyway. Forget Quinnen Williams. Here's what we think we want. I think that I do think it'll get done. I think the holdup here is going to be the length. I don't think it's the per year. Maybe it is, but that just seems easier to navigate than the length.
If the holdup is the length, then if that is like, it's not about the money, it's not about what they're paying him, then maybe in their minds the best option is to test a holdout this year and then franchise tag him.
I mean, it might be the best option on the field to put the pressure back on Chris Jones. Chris Jones has been such a good and model member of this franchise. I don't think anybody wants it to go there.
You're going to burn that bridge. You're going to burn that bridge.
About strictly a business decision, Tommy, I would say that that's probably the best way to go. Right?
Wow.
Like I because then it's a 1-year deal. And look, if Chris Jones continues to play at that level, he's going to make a ton of money on those franchise tags. It's not like the running backs. Like, you get paid gobs and gobs of money. We've seen this happen with quarterbacks. These franchise tag, you make just a big, massive number for a year, and then you go back to it. We've seen it at other positions. It would almost certainly disgruntle Jones. But in 2 years, are you that worried about that? Again, cutthroat business decision.
Look, keep in mind, this would not be the first time that Chris Jones has had the franchise tag placed on him from Kansas City. It happened back in 2020. They placed the franchise tag on him, and then they ultimately came together and they signed an extension. But it's happened before. It was the non-exclusive tag.
Isn't it too late for that, though?
But they tagged him for that.
Can they still tag him?
Yeah.
Isn't it too late in the offseason to tag him?
Well, they wouldn't. They can't tag him this year. He's under contract. Like he'd have his final year of the contract. It would be at the end of next year. So that's where it comes into play. Does Chris Jones have the appetite? If that were to happen and the Chiefs say, look, man, you want a 4-year deal? We just can't go that 4th year. Like, we'll do 3, but we can't go that 4. And if that's a sticking point for Chris Jones, then at that point, does Chris Jones say, I'm not going to play my final year of the contract? And I don't know I don't know if he's got the appetite to do that.
At that point, did the Chiefs trade him?
Right.
I mean, that's an option, and I know people don't want to hear that.
I don't trade him now. You trade him right now, right before the preseason. What kind of value are you going to get back? I think you would get a good amount of return back, but you're not getting, more than likely, you're probably not getting anybody that can directly impact you right away.
Totally. No.
You're going to get draft picks and things like that.
Yeah.
But you're not going to get a whole lot of return right now.
No, you will not help yourself this year if you trade Chris Jones, but you could help yourself down the road. They'd get a big package for Chris Jones if they traded him. They'd get at least one first, if not, a first, a second, or whatever. I don't think anybody wants it to get to that. I don't think Chris Jones wants it to get to that.
No.
So, you hope that these conversations can just happen peacefully and get resolved. Remember this, if you're concerned, like we are, because we both really like Chris Jones and think he's unbelievable, just remember how quickly the Tyreek Hill situation got to the point it did. Like, there are reports that was like it within days. Like, he saw the Adams contract, said, I want more, and they said, no, we're going to trade you. Boom, 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 like days, like quickly, no thought put into it whatsoever. Tyreek Hill has had off-the-field troubles, obviously, but I think inside the locker room and for the fan base was a very valued member of the organization, right? Chris Jones doesn't have any of that off the field and also is that. I think if the Chiefs were going to go down the road of that sort of cutthroat decision, there is precedent in Tyreek Hill that happened real fast, right? Like they were like, nope, we're done with that. He's on the market, everybody. Now, they did that before the draft, but so I don't think that's where they'd like to go either. I think that'd be like the last, probably if you had to power rank their ideas for how this works and resolves itself out, that'd probably be the last option. I think they want to get the deal done. I think it probably has more to do with length of the deal. And now, with the Herbert deal, it makes me wonder, what does the Mahomes contract extension that will ultimately come at some point, how does that factor in? I don't think Mahomes inherently prevents them from signing Chris Jones. I think the opposite. I think there's a chance, how does Mahomes help you sign Chris Jones? And can that be put into play here to also help you at least keep the offensive linemen that need to be re-signed?
Man, I'll tell you right now, if Patrick Mahomes is involved with his own contract to free up money to sign Chris Jones, I mean, you're talking about maybe the most selfless quarterback of all time with his own money, right? Like in a world where you've got guys like Lamar Jackson and his contract demands, and then all these other quarterbacks that are demanding all this money. If Patrick Mahomes, and I'm not saying that he's going to do this, but if he goes to Brett Veach and says, we need to have Chris Jones, we need to have him long term, what can I do to free up money to make it happen? It's unprecedented. We've never seen anything like that.
We have. Tom Brady did it a lot. Tony Romo did it with the Cowboys.
But to that level?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they restructured quite a bit. Brady and Romo did. Now, and I know I'm forgetting about one. There's been the path to doing that is pretty similar to Mahomes. It's always been like off the field, heavily endorsed. I don't know if Peyton Manning did it. I can't remember. But I wouldn't be surprised. It's the guys that have careers outside of football, basically, like that are very obvious and going to be very fruitful that have done it. But, Mahomes is not going to make the most money he makes over his lifetime as a football player, I don't think, right? It will all come in other places. Like, it's going to come – we haven't even scratched the surface. I mean, we know he's got, like, Adidas and Oakley and Coors Light, and he's an part owner of the Royals and the KC Current. Yeah. And he if he wants it, he'll have a broadcasting opportunity in the aftermath. Like, all of these things are going to be on the table for Mahomes. So, yeah, it's an easier decision for him than some other quarterbacks that don't have that luxury of what they'll do after their playing days are done. But the timing of this, when we see the Herbert deal, is interesting as it pertains to Chris Jones. I hate imagining a world without 95 in the middle of that Chiefs defense this year.
Me too.
But I don't think it's out of the question. I still don't think it's likely. I'd still think it's more likely they get him. But it's on the table, and that kind of sucks. 869-1240 is the number to call. What do you think, Chiefs fans? We'll come back. We'll hit on the TBT a little bit. Some of the other sports stories rotating around the world here as we take you through this Wednesday. It's all Brockton Caster at Sports Daily. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back, everybody. Sports Daily. Sean Payton, not happy about the NFL's gambling policy. Says shame on us after all these suspensions. Said it's basically the league's fault for not being more clear on how this works. Look, I don't know what the league is telling players. I think the league does have a responsibility to make sure that players are doing the right things as they partner with, these gambling sites. I am sort of over, the league being lectured by people saying you can't hold your players accountable and have these partnerships with betting sites. Like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Yes, the league can have these partnerships because it is a massive part of the reason the league is so successful. It is a future reason why the league will remain successful. And it is totally okay to tell your players, but you don't get to do it. Those are the rules. Like, it's not like the league doesn't need to get lectured on this. I'm sorry, coaches. Do a better job telling your players, guys, you can't do this. Like that. And the league deserves responsibility, and like they've got to do the same thing. But stop lecturing the league about like partnering with these sites. Like, be realistic about this. There is now technology and all these things, and there are inherent risks. But a massive reason, Tommy, that the NFL is so successful is because it's the most fun sport to bet. Let's be real about that. It's the absolute truth. So, Sean Payton, while you're cashing those big old checks, you might as well get over. And everybody else lecturing the league on being partners with these sites, because that's part of the reason you get paid so much.
I don't know. I think that's a little unfair. I think that it's a little bit more of like, do what I say, not what I do, from the league. It's kind of duplicitous in my mind, just because of the fact that they are profiting so much money from betting, and I get it, and I'm totally on board with it, and it has improved the fan experience. It has opened up so many different avenues for fans, but there have been multiple reports that the NFL has done a poor job in educating the players and the people in the league to make sure that they understand the risks behind that. Now, I wholeheartedly believe that it can, significantly damage the game and the integrity of the game if you've got players that are involved in this, right? Like, I will never disagree with that. But if you are trying to hold players to a standard, but you're not really educating them on that standard, and they don't know, I mean, like, there were so many different like little rules in place that players said they had no idea about. Like, you can't bet on anything on the grounds of an NFL team's facility. They didn't know that. They're not betting on the NFL. They're betting on other sports, but they didn't know that they can't walk onto the premises of their practice facility or whatever, and just by being there, you can't place a bet on a baseball game or a basketball game. They didn't know that. And so maybe they're playing dumb, but I do think that the league does deserve criticism for saying, we're going to accept all this money, but we're not really going to educate the players on the risks with this and the things that they need to be doing. And then we're just going to suspend them when they break a rule that they didn't know that was in place.
They can do a better job of education. There's no question about that. It's no different than the substance abuse policies as it pertains to performance-enhancing drugs, right? It is, this is an off-base comparison, but it would be like selling beer at the stadium, but telling players, you can't get hammered and drive home. They have rules against certain things all the time. Like, there are certain sacrifices you must make to be a player in this league, period. Like, that's the part of it. Okay. Like, that's just a part of the deal. You can bet as much as you want when you're done being a player. And no, you can't bet at the facility. And no, you can never bet on football. That should be obvious to everybody now. You cannot make an NFL bet, but you can't do any betting while you're at the facility because you just can't blend the two things. Sean Payton says, I know this. There's a handful of owners that are owning these problems. A player can't have a share of DraftKings or FanDuel. It's shameful, embarrassing. It's not embarrassing that a player can't have shares of the betting sites. There's nothing more important than the integrity of your league. Nothing. Now, there is something to say. Neither should coaches and probably owners. And I don't know if owners are allowed to have shares of those companies, but they shouldn't be allowed to either because that integrity can go that far up too. Like, you could say owners are tanking or whatever. So I don't know if owners are allowed to have shares and players aren't. If that's the case, that is a little embarrassing.
I do think that you can make a connection that some of the contract money that players receive as part of their deals trickles down from the revenue that these teams are making from betting sites, right?
And that's the part of it I don't like. Like, these coaches pretending like they and players aren't benefiting from these partnerships in the NFL is very, very naive. Right? Like, of course you're benefiting from it. The salary cap keeps going up, right? Like, it's not, come on now. Like, everybody gets paid more because the league's making more money. And the league's making more money because of these partnerships. It's what the fans want. And when you're a player, you just don't get to do it. That's it. Like, if I were a coach or a team, here's what I would do. I would say, guys, here's the deal. Don't bet on anything while you're playing. Okay? Just don't bet on anything. I know that sucks, and I know it's fun, and I know you guys want to play fantasy baseball and do all this stuff and have fun and bet on March Madness like the rest of us. But, man, you're making a lot of money. That's just going to have to be a rule here. There are companies in states where weed is legal, Tommy, that don't allow employees to smoke weed. Okay? It's just like, okay, like that's one of the things that you have to kind of do to work at this company and make lots of money. That's what I would do. I would say just don't ever bet on anything. It's don't ever. And Sean Payton, this was interesting. He said for him, it's like the gun policy. Like, you don't bet anywhere you can't have a gun. Airplane, hotel, stadium, anywhere. That's a constitutional right. So it's a little bit different, right? It is. Yeah. It is a little bit different. But it's just, let's stop being naive to this. Like, it's a part of it. It's going to be a part of it. And everybody in the league that plays or coaches or does anything else benefits from it.
Here's a perfect example. I work for a minor league hockey franchise. I am not allowed to bet on hockey. I had to sign a form saying that I would not wager on hockey. And I've never lost a minute of sleep on that, about that at all. I signed it. Okay, no big deal. That's one of the rules. It's one of the requirements. I'm not allowed to do that because I'm an employee of a professional hockey franchise where there could potentially be ramifications towards the integrity of the game. Bottom line. And I signed it, and it's no big deal. It's kind of the same way. I mean, it's pretty similar. Like, you have restrictions based on what you are doing. I'm sure that there are employers out there, just in general, that, probably say, hey, ex-employee, you are not allowed to bet while you're on the premises of the job because it's taking away from your job performance. Like, that's just a rule we have. You cannot be on DraftKings or FanDuel or whatever while you're working, while you're clocked in. That's just a rule. You have to abide by that. So I think that it's okay for the NFL to put restrictions on the players. I'm never going to argue that, but they've got to consistently teach these players exactly what they can and can't do. And if they're going to allow exceptions, I mean, it'd be different if the NFL just had a blanket policy like you were talking about. No betting whatsoever. If you're a player, you can't do it on anything. If there was a blanket policy, that'd be easier to enforce and to police. But if you're going to have these exceptions, like you can bet on other sports, you just can't do it at the team facility or whatever, you've got to educate these players. And if those policies ever change, if the goalposts ever move, you have to make sure that everybody knows exactly what's going on.
Well, you can take it up and make it more clear the next time bargaining comes up. And there's clearly technology for these guys to get busted. Yeah, and maybe some of that responsibility goes to the coaches. I don't know. The league can talk to players all the time about substance abuse and be very careful what you take as supplements and all these things that get players popped all the time. Across sports, like those mistakes happen all the time. I think as fans, what we've got to realize is it's just it is very similar to the substance abuse policy. Your players are at risk of getting suspended for this. I totally understand why they're at risk for getting suspended for this. I agree with them getting suspended for this because you can't have the integrity portion of what you do ever come into question. I don't think that the NFL's in any danger of that. Has anybody ever questioned that? You already have that issue in some sports with tanking. I think the NFL is the least privy to tanking. The Texans cost themselves the first overall pick by winning their last game of the season last year. Like, tanking doesn't really happen in the NFL like it does in basketball or baseball. So the NFL, I don't think they're in any danger of that. But clearly, by what we're saying, they're not going to take any risks there because they know it's such a big piece of their business for the future. There's no question.
I would just be, I'd be an advocate, honestly, if it was just a flat out, no nonsense, blanket policy If you're a player, a coach, a team employee, front office, whatever, you can't bet. You can't do it. And then that way, there's no misinterpretation of the policy. If somebody gets suspended, everybody knows damn well what that person did and that it broke the policy. And I think that's where it goes back to Sean Payton, who is talking about it being unfair and all this stuff. Like, I think that there is a misunderstanding, and that might be the fault of the NFL. It might be the fault of the teams and the coaches and the players and all of that not really paying attention. I don't know. But if you just had a blanket policy, one size fits all, then there can be no misunderstanding on what the policy actually is. And when somebody gets suspended, you're like, all right, they broke the policy. We all know what it is.
Let me be clear about this, and this is where I have the most issue. The most responsibility is on the players. It's not on the league or the coaches to educate the players. It's on the players to become educated. That period. Like, let's not place blame solely where it doesn't need to be. If you get suspended for gambling, the number one arrow of responsibility goes to you for breaking a rule that's in place. Like, it is your responsibility to know the rules of your employment. Like, period. Can it be better navigated and better policies to help? Sure, it can. But at the end of the day, the players own the most responsibility in making sure they don't break the rules of the league that they play in. They're employees of the league. You got to make sure you know what the rules are. I mean, that's I don't know. It is watch. Just as an aside, I don't know if that picked up. Do you have you have one of these watches, right? These apps?
I actually looked at mine when I heard that because I thought it was mine for a minute.
Does it randomly just try to text what you're saying? Like, it took that 4-minute conversation as I looked down, and it had this novel typed up. Crazy town. But anyway, players are responsible. Yes, it can be better. Just don't break the rules. Know what the rules are. Can the league do a better job of making sure everybody knows what those rules are? Yeah, but it's
sure.
The number one responsibility
100%.
goes to the players for knowing what those rules are. You play in the league. You got to know. You got to know, and it's not going away, and the league is not going to get more lax with those rules. If anything, they'll get more strict. 869-1240 is the number to call. We'll come back. On the way out here, let's give away some WinSurge vouchers. We'll give away a 4-pack, courtesy of us here at Sports Daily and KFH. What you can do with those vouchers is pick any game you want to. They're really cool. You can go whenever is convenient for you. 4 of them to our first caller right now on the IHOP hotline, 869-1240. We'll come back. We'll talk about the aftershocks last night when we return on Sports Daily. Welcome back in to Sports Daily here on KFH. Jake Ballbrock, Tommy Castor, Jad Chambers producing for us, manning that IHOP hotline. Tommy, the Aftershocks could not get it done last night, unfortunately. They were very competitive, I thought, in that game, much more so than the final score indicated. It did get away from them at the end. They just couldn't, they never really did in the tournament either. They couldn't hit a lot of shots, and they were able to survive that, but it wasn't enough, and Team Heartfire was as good as, Fran Fraschilla, who follows all this stuff closely, said that they were. He had been high on them, all the way through, and that was a good team. They were well coached, 7,200 fans, and Wichita broke its own record, largest crowd in tournament history. They now own the top, 7 of those crowds. 7,200 fans gets me so excited for Shocker basketball, Tommy. It's what makes this tournament fun. If they played this tournament every year and all the same things existed and fans weren't showing up like this, it wouldn't be as much fun. Absolutely the best thing about it is that people show up and get into it. And that makes it fun. And, kudos to everybody for doing that. And aw shucks for the Aftershocks. They almost got back to that Final Four, and I think they'll continue to be there in the mix, and hopefully so will KU and K-State as they continue to improve their rosters.
It's always a fun ride, in the dog days of summer when you're just waiting and waiting and waiting for football season and then basketball season, and you got not a whole lot going on. It's hot outside. And then you've got some pretty high-level basketball going on inside Koch Arena. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. it took me a while to get into the TBT because I thought it was kind of a novelty at first. And the longer it's gone on, year in and year out, man, the more must-see TV it becomes. Being inside Koch Arena also is amazing. And watching not only the Aftershocks, but the other teams that, come in for the regional and just the fan support that's behind it. I mean, people get up for TBT, and that's awesome to see. The Aftershocks are 10-3 in their last 3 tournaments, which is incredible. Shout out to Zach Bush, head coach of the team. He's done a phenomenal job. You're right. Heartfire is really, really good. I didn't realize they're coached by LaFonso Ellis. And so that's pretty cool too. They were really, really good, and they forced a lot of turnovers on the Aftershocks. It just sort of, seemed to me that really the Aftershocks just could never get into a run to cut the lead to where it was manageable. They would get into a mini run, they'd make a 3, that sort of thing. And then Heartfire would just come right down and score on them and just extinguish whatever that run could have possibly been for the Aftershocks. So they ran into a really, really top tier opponent in Heartfire. But man, hats off to all of them. They did a great job, and it's really cool to see that support.
I thought they had a real good chance this year. I really did, and I wonder at what point they're going to have to sort of reset the roster to some degree. We'll see. But, TBT's in the books for all intents and purposes now. We probably won't pay a ton of it. Well, we won't here on this show. Like, we're not going to tell you about the Final Four now. But, good job. I love that in the summertime we get this. We were talking around the office, like, some of the guys were trying to power rank Wichita sporting events and where things line up. And, it was interesting to hear everybody's thoughts on where this comes in. I do think that people have begun to own it a little bit. I do think there's a little pride in these attendance records involved. It's all really cool. I think everything about it is cool. And, we'll keep, shouting from the rooftops the fact that we should keep the Elam ending and get this thing going the rest of the way. Just a real quick look around some headlines. There has been, I should say, interest in Shohei Ohtani. Teams are checking in. Man, we've got the trade deadline in 5 days.
It's coming up.
And it feels like we're going to have 30 of these things all drop at once. It's really strange to me that we have not seen more from the trade world than we've seen so far.
A lot of teams that you would think might be sellers, they all won yesterday. And so and some of these teams are right on the fence. It depends on how the series go this week. And I know the Angels are one of those teams. They're in the wild card hunt right now. And so it wouldn't surprise me if they keep winning this week that they don't move Shohei Ohtani. And I think that there are other players. The Cubs are one of them that they've got Marcus Stroman. They've got Cody Bellinger that I think they're listening to offers on, but I don't know if they're going to be willing to move them. There are a lot of teams that are right on that edge on being buyers or sellers. The teams that we know for sure are going to be sellers. The issue is a lot of them don't have quality players to trade. So I think it's going to be a really interesting trade deadline.
I do too. I think it's going to stay a seller's market. And, we'll just have to see how much of a seller's market and if that could benefit the Royals. They do have, I think, at least 2 attractive pieces, relatively attractive pieces in Barlow and Hernandez. And probably, Tommy, the longer we wait, the more attractive those trade pieces become and the more valuable that they are.
It wouldn't surprise me if Hernandez goes first. I think teams covet him. Maybe even a little bit more than Scott Barlow. I think ultimately both will go, but I wouldn't be surprised to see Hernandez go first.
Both better go. It's not even a will. You had better move those assets this year. It's taken too long anyway. It has to happen now this year. 869-1240. We'll come back. We'll tell you what's on tap today when we return on Sports Day.
Prairie Band Casino wants to know, how do you play? Are you...
So, we've got a number 1 deluxe meal. Is there anything else I can get you?
Yeah, I'd also like a good night's sleep. Maybe something like the I didn't struggle all night with my uncomfortable CPAP mask.
Sir, I think what you're looking for is Inspire. It's an implant that works inside your body to treat sleep apnea without a CPAP.
Come on! He sounds angry. Inspire, sleep apnea innovation. Inspire is not for everyone. Talk to your doctor to see if it's right for you and review important safety information at inspiresleep.com.